Thank you all so much for joining us this evening for the next 45 minutes. We hope that this is a meaningful use of your time as we talk through the FAFSA and work to eliminate any and all stresses around filling out your application in 2024. I'm honored to sit here today with my esteemed panelists. We have Erin, Elaine, and Zack. My name is Allie Danziger. I am the GM of AscentUP, which is a training platform that offers wraparound services to all of Ascent borrowers to help young professionals and students succeed in college and beyond. Erin, I'll pass it to you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Erin Annis, and I am the School Sales Support Coordinator here at Ascent. I currently work with students, families, and colleges to help navigate private loans, how they work, where you could get them from, all the above. I also have 16 years in higher education, so I am very pleased to be here and excited to get started. Zack?
Hello, everyone. I am also excited to be here with all of you to talk about this important topic. My name is Zack Goodwin. Like Erin, I have some mixed experience. I have been in the financial aid and related professions for about 30 years, and about 25 of those in higher education, which is where I am now at the University of Nevada. Elaine.
Hello, everyone. I'm Elaine Rubin. I'm the Director of Corporate Communications at Advisors. I've also been in the space for quite a bit of time. I'm trying to catch up to Zack, but I've been working with students and families for more than 15 years, helping them through navigating paying for college, and even on the other side, working through those student loans and getting through repayment successfully.
Thank you so much, Elaine. We have a poll because, again, I want to make sure that this is a useful time for everyone. You have incredible speakers here today that are here to answer all of your questions. And so as this poll pops up, can we get it going? There we go. We want to know what is holding you back today from submitting the FAFSA, excuse me. Have you not been able to gather all of your financial documents yet? Are you unsure of the process? Are you concerned about eligibility? Busy with other priorities? We totally get it. Waiting for parents or guardians' financial information? Are you just stressed about all the complexities here, not sure yet which colleges you'll be accepted to? Or are you just concerned about all the chaos surrounding the FAFSA application and just want to hang tight for a little bit? Please submit your answer so that, again, we can make sure that we are addressing your biggest concerns here. And while you're filling that out, I will say, please drop questions into the chat. We are monitoring it and we'll have an opportunity for Q&A. All right, hopefully you've all had a chance. I don't see the answers yet, but hopefully they're coming up soon. Well, what I will say is we've got you, because every single thing that is on that poll, we are going to be covering here today. We're really, here's our answers. I don't know if everyone can see that, but the biggest percentage of you are unsure about the FAFSA process and need guidance. Again, we've got you. That is what we are here to do for the next 43 minutes. Concerned about eligibility, we'll be covering that. Busy with other priorities, totally get it, not to worry, because we'll talk through the timeline and what's a reasonable amount of time to take for this and when you need to get everything done by, and haven't gathered all of my financial documents yet, 19% of you. Again, we get it, and we'll talk to you about what you need to prep for so that when you go fill out your FAFSA, you're fully prepared and have everything in front of you. So we'll talk through important due dates and deadlines, key terms you need to know, because I know this is a really overwhelming process. The 2024 application process will walk you through every single step here. What does eligibility actually mean and how do you keep it? Common terms and FAQs, and then deeply understanding your offer. With that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Erin, and let's get started.
Okay, so why we're all here is, why is the FAFSA important? And the first thing I'd like to let you all know is the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. It is free. There are some pay for sites out there, so I always like to let students and families know you never pay for a free application. The FAFSA is important for all students. It doesn't matter whether you think you can get Pell or not. It's not advancing, Allie. like, oh, there we go. Sorry. Students seem to be a little bit afraid of completing the FAFSA for various different reasons. There may be thoughts that they can't afford, or they have too much money. Their family earns too much money, or they may not be eligible, or they don't have all the information. The FAFSA does allow students and families to apply for not only the grants and scholarships, but student loans, institutional and state financial aid, regardless of income. Some of those things could still come into play, but do still require the FAFSA. So it's very important to complete the FAFSA every year. But as you can see, we have 33% of the students families can afford it, but don't use the financial aid. So, and there's $38 million of grants that are not utilized every year.
3.5 billion.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was up there.
Yeah, it's a
Thank
ton.
you.
So fill it out.
All right. So important due dates. So going into college, everything has a due date, right? So the FAFSA usually would open up on October 1st. This year was a little bit different with the changes in the FAFSA and the deadline. So it was open end of December. You do still have until the end of June to complete your FAFSA. However, the sooner you get the FAFSA done prior to the start of the semester, the better. This year being a little bit different, financial aid offices are probably going to be more towards middle to late February before you see anything after submission, but you don't have a due date prior to June for necessity. And like it says here, you can also check your deadlines by state. States have different deadlines for their state funds depending on the state that you live in. So it could vary depending on states. Elaine or Zach, do you want to add anything with dates or deadlines?
I'll add a little bit more. Sorry, Zach, I'll jump in for a bit.
Yeah.
But there's, essentially 3 very important deadlines you're looking for. The federal one being this June 30th, 2025 is typically the one that most students aren't concerned with. There could be some programs that may be starting closer to that date where you might be concerned about that. But your state deadline and your school deadline are going to be the most important deadlines that you need to determine. If you don't know where you're going yet and you're applying to 20 schools, look up the deadlines for all 20 schools. It does take some time, it does take some effort, but you don't want to be behind the 8 ball. You don't want to miss a deadline and essentially not be eligible for some of that financial aid that you could have been eligible if you got it in before then. So the most important deadline will always be the earliest deadline. And I'm going to pass it to Zach because, we're in a soft launch period and there is a little bit soft launch just means there could be some quirkiness with the FAFSA. So anything he wants to add with some of that soft launch and the FAFSA deadlines.
Sure. And you absolutely took the words right out of my mouth about how important it is to know for the schools that you're applying to what their processes and deadlines are. This FAFSA deadline that you see of June 30th is the absolute last day that you can complete one and be considered for federal financial aid. But your school may have their own deadlines for institutional aid consideration. Erin already mentioned about state deadlines. I had wanted to add, and then I'll speak very briefly about the soft launch, that some states, there are a few in the United States that had been receiving financial information from families via the FAFSA. That isn't happening in 24-25, and we hope that following year this will be able to resume because they could take that information and auto-populate a state aid application for you. So depending on where you live, the only state I can think of right now is Vermont for some reason, but wherever you go, do check what your state's requirements are. For this FAFSA soft launch period, as Elaine mentioned, there are just technical issues that they knew full well would be encountered that they will be trying to resolve as the weeks go on. And I might just throw out there now because I saw some questions in the chat about it. We'll talk about timing later as well, but you may see your FAFSA once you've submitted it sitting in under review status for a while. Please don't be concerned. This is really just part of the soft launch and it's going to take a little longer than normal for things like that.
Thank you, guys. So things have changed from previous years in completing the FAFSA. So those of you who have completed the FAFSA in the past may notice a little bit of changes. The FAFSA is very user-friendly. I've completed it myself. It's very sleek and it seems to be doing pretty well, but there have been some changes from year to year. So I did want to talk a little bit about these points, but you guys don't need to hear me talk anymore. So I'm going to have Elaine and Zack talk a little bit about some of the changes. Elaine, if you wanted to start.
So if you've done the FAFSA in the past, you're going to be the one who's going to notice most of the changes. If this is your first time, you're not going to notice there's been changes because you haven't, chances are you don't complete FAFSAs for fun. Some of us do, but typically you're not going to notice and you just want to go through and answer those questions. I will say with these changes, there's a lot of unknowns because people have been used to a process. They've been used to a lot of questions being asked. And one of the biggest concerns from families is once they complete the process and they say it took them 15, 20 minutes and they're done, they're asking if they missed something. That's typically, chances are they're fine. The FAFSA isn't being processed in the soft launch period as quickly as it typically would be. So being, like Zack was saying, in that pending status, waiting for your summary, your FAFSA submission summary, that's normal and that's expected. But there will be new terms on here or on the FAFSA that you haven't seen before. That EFC number, if you're looking for that, it's not called the EFC or the expected family contribution anymore. It's actually called the Student Aid Index. So that's actually the number schools will use to help figure out where you lie as far as financial need with all the other students, with your cost of attendance to help award that aid. So that's one of the biggest changes you will see. And then some of the other things are the way that you would report your income tax information from the IRS. In the past, if you've done it, you know you had the option to do the DRT, the data retrieval from the IRS, and that was an option. Now the federal tax information transfer is not optional, and you do have to approve, you have to offer consent for that process to take place if you are the student completing the FAFSA, a FAFSA parent who's required, and potentially a FAFSA contributor, which is another new term and a new person in the FAFSA process. And as you go through it, it actually makes more sense than explaining it. And I know there's a lot of terms and a lot of information out there, but as you go through it, it does start to fall into place to help you through. I'll pass it to Zack.
I'm going to actually defer because we'll be coming back to some of these concepts in a slide or two, and we can talk a little bit more about it there.
Awesome.
All right, so who is eligible? And I kind of touched on this at the beginning. Everybody going to college, whether you are a first year freshman, a senior, a grad student, you should fill out the FAFSA. The FAFSA is that application that will give you eligibility for not just the Pell Grant or the student loans, but it will also indicate your eligibility for state funds, some institutional aid, scholarships, those types of funds, work study. So it's very important, regardless of your financial situation, to complete the FAFSA. To remain eligible for the funds that you are granted, obviously you got to get good grades, right? You know, the federal government wants you to succeed and you need to be in the eligible program of study. So, you know, your typical associate, bachelor's or master's degrees. And you want to continue to go to school. So if you sign up for class, you got to go to school. You got to go to class, do your homework, do your tests. There are some max eligibilities for the Pell Grant and the student loans. So you're going to want to make sure that you don't borrow or exceed those max out amounts. So yeah, if you don't know, you should apply anyways. You may be surprised and get some institutional funds or a scholarship here and there. So definitely complete the FAFSA, even if you're not sure what you're eligible for. Better safe than sorry. And you do have to do it every year. So financial situations do change. Okay. Anything you guys would like to add?
A question popped in, anything different for a transfer student if you transfer?
Mm-mm.
Great.
No, transfer students, when you complete the FAFSA, you're allowed to put up to 20 different schools on the FAFSA that will transfer your information over to those schools. So transfer students can do the FAFSA as well. The only thing I would suggest is if the student is transferring like in the middle of an academic year, to do that kind of early on. When they find out they're going to transfer, it just helps with that processing, and working with the school that they are going to transfer to is helpful. Okay.
All right, so what you need to get started. We say a cup of coffee, but just something to keep you hydrated in there. But the most important thing that I cannot emphasize enough is that you need an FSA ID. An FSA ID is a username and password to help you get into the electronic application. If you are a parent who is required to provide information on the FAFSA, or a step parent who is required to provide information for a student's FAFSA, you would also need an FSA ID. The reason I said step parent with a bit of hesitation is it's not always guaranteed that your step parent will need to be what's known as a FAFSA contributor. But if your parent who's providing information on the FAFSA for you is married and it's not your parent, it's a step parent, and they actually, it could be your parent as well, and they do not file their taxes jointly for the base year, they would likely need an FSA ID as a contributor to also help you complete your FAFSA to get that information in there. I think I saw one of the questions in here saying, as a parent, what's your role? If your student is required to provide your information, you will help them with that. In past years, one FSA ID could get you pretty far as far as getting the application complete. In the 2024-2025 year, that is not the case. A student would complete their section, complete their information. A FAFSA parent or contributor, if they're required to put information, they would need to log in with their own FSA ID, not the students, their own personal FSA ID, and complete their sections and be marked as complete for that FAFSA to move on to full completion. Now, that FSA ID, if you do not have one already, it's not a process that is instant. So you do need to make sure if you're planning with your parents to get this done, give yourself 3 days ahead of time at least to get that FSA ID, because it does have some processing time. That FSA ID is typically tied to a social security number if you have one. Not all parents, if you're a parent, you don't necessarily need a social security number for an FSA ID starting this year for the 2024-2025 FAFSA. You can create one to help your student complete a FAFSA form. And students do have to be US citizens or an eligible non-citizen, and I did see that question as well. So that's not the case when it comes to a student, but a parent providing information or contributor, you can create an FSA ID without a social security number.
Elaine, a
You also
question
want to
came
have.
in. Oh, sorry.
Go
A
ahead.
question came in about this that I think it's interesting and want to address. If a parent is still paying off their federal student loan and they have an FSA ID, do they need a new one, or will that FSA ID continue to follow them through this process?
So that's a great question. Your FSA ID will follow you through this whole process and through student loan repayment. So students, write it down, keep it handy, make sure you know where it is and that you can verify it. If you do need to do a process of forget your password, you know that email address where it's attached. And same with parents, make sure you're keeping track of that as well. We always discourage the practice of people creating FSA IDs for their student or their parent to help through the process. Everyone should make their own and keep it handy because it will follow you. Essentially, there are some protections around that. So you can't really have multiple FSA IDs for one person. They are limited. So keep that handy.
And what if you don't keep it handy? What if you forget or lose it?
So it's a username password right on studentaid.gov where you would create that FSA ID. There are some prompts. If you forget your password, you forget your email address that it's tied to, and ultimately you can call Federal Student Aid's helpline if you are completely stuck and you cannot find your credentials anywhere to help unlock that account for you. But as we know, calling FSA right now, that's Federal Student Aid. It might be a little bit of a wait time, especially during this soft launch period, because there are a lot of questions. There are some quirks, and people are getting through this new FAFSA. So it might take a little bit of time if you do need to take that route. So it's always best to keep this handy for yourself and take that ownership of these credentials. And then this is a great list here. I would screenshot this if you can. But you do want to have access to your tax information, your income information. Most people with this federal tax transfer will see this auto-populated. You won't necessarily visually see what's imported in there, but a lot of these questions will be answered for you. The great thing about the FAFSA, which isn't new, but I believe it's more improved this year, is this skip logic. If the FAFSA already knows the answer, it's not going to ask you the question again. And it'll only ask you the questions that are relevant to you. So once this is transferred in there from the IRS, if you were successfully able to do that, you might not see all these income questions, but just in case, have your information handy if you do have to answer the questions on your own. So just putting that out there. Untaxed. So this is interesting. So there's always an untaxed income portion on the FAFSA where you'll disclose things that aren't necessarily reported to the IRS. Child support this year is actually considered an asset, but this is child support received. So the person being asked this question, it could be a student or a parent, it's the child support received, not the amount that's been paid out. So that's always an important distinction because people get confused there. And you don't want to say what you're paying out versus receiving it and classifying that as an asset on your FAFSA. And they do ask you questions about things like your bank account or how much cash you have on there as well. And I have seen some comments where people aren't seeing this question clearly or they think they skipped it, but it's on there on the FAFSA. And it's, some of these, when it comes to assets, some of the information provided is as of the day you're completing the FAFSA. So just read those prompts extremely carefully and make sure you're answering the question being asked.
Do you mind if I add just a couple of little things to that? Elaine beautifully said. I did want to mention, just because I have seen some related questions come through in the Q&A, if you are a contributor or if you are an applicant who has a contributor who does not have a social security number, they will go through a different kind of identity verification. If it's someone with a social security number, the reason it takes a couple of days to process, as Elaine mentioned, is that it's matching against the Social Security Administration to check the validity and be sure that matches your name and all of that good stuff. If you don't have a social security number, the process that someone goes through to get their FSA ID is a match process via TransUnion, which is one of the credit bureaus. It's generally pretty simple in terms of the questions asked. It might be about former addresses or phone numbers, places you lived, counties, things like that. If that contributor is able to answer those questions successfully and pass, they actually have an immediately valid FSA ID. That's the only time it will be immediately valid. If that person does not pass, unfortunately, there's a secondary process that Federal Student Aid will contact you about and some documentation you may need to provide. To Elaine's point about taxes, it really is very helpful just to be sure you have all of this paperwork with you. From what I'm hearing anecdotally, the feed from the IRS seems to be working quite well, but there is always a chance, for whatever reason, that information won't come in and it will ask you for it manually. I was speaking with a parent today who was very confused. Now, he has a student who's a junior, so they've been doing the old FAFSA, so to speak, and he was confused about importing tax data because he didn't see that anything happened. So also to kind of Elaine's point, when you give that consent to import the data, it's very seamless when it works. You just won't be asked much of anything about your income. So if you get to a page asking you about income and there are just one or two questions there, you can feel pretty safe that the transfer worked. You just won't see what data was actually transferred. And I wanted to remind folks too, when we talk about assets like cash or investments, that does also include any investment properties or farms that you own, businesses that you own. For those of you who may be applying for a second or third year with the FAFSA, this is a change. In the past, family farms, family businesses could often be excluded from consideration on the FAFSA, and that is no longer the case. Those exemptions are gone.
I just have to say, I feel so lucky to have such experts on this webinar. So you guys are doing awesome. The questions coming in are great. And thank you so much for giving such detailed information to our attendees.
All right, so now that we've got our FSA ID and we've gone through probably the hardest part of this entire process is getting the FSA ID, we can actually complete our FAFSA by logging into FAFSA.gov using your FSA ID and password. Once you are in the FAFSA, there's only a few sections that are going to pop up for you, and they're very user-friendly. There's little hints on the side. It's really, really convenient actually, but they'll ask you questions like your address, other demographics. You'll pick your colleges based on either school code or the name and city and state of the school, and it will let you search that out. You'll have some dependency questions, whether you're going to be considered a dependent student and need to include parental or contributor information. Then there's the income information that we've been talking about. And then when you get to the end, you sign and submit it and it gets sent off. So we're going to kind of go into a little bit more detail on some of these steps, but that is the gist. We do have some terms that are new or kind of buzzwords when you're completing the FAFSA. And I'm going to ask that Zack and Elaine kind of give us a brief definition of what each of these are. So I'm going to start with Elaine. And can you define what an SAI is, since this is new this year?
Yes, I think I gave a little preview earlier. That student aid index is replacing that expected family contribution for those who have completed the FAFSA at some time in their lifetime, because the EFC has been around for a very long time. And the EFC, one of the biggest criticisms was that it did not reflect a family situation, and it was starting to get confused with this is the amount I pay because of the way it was explained. So now it's been replaced with the student aid index. You put all your information in the FAFSA, you submit it. This will ultimately be the number that you get now. The FAFSA, like we said, is in the soft launch period right now, at least through the end of January. So they're not being processed. So you might see that it cannot be calculated at this time, or actually, if you even got one, don't be surprised if that number changed once it's officially calculated. So just hold tight if you have an SAI because you already completed the FAFSA. But this index number essentially will help your school determine where you are as far as financial need compared to the other students attending. With this, they look at cost of attendance, and they use this number to help award your financial aid. One thing to note, if you've ever had an EFC that's rather low or zero, don't be shocked if this SAI is negative. It actually can be a negative number. And please erase the mentality that this is what you pay. This is not the number you pay. This is really helping schools assess where you are in comparison and awarding aid as they are able. Every school will be different as well. So it all comes down to what they can award based on this number that they get once you complete the form.
Thank you, Elaine. All right, Zack, can you please describe or define what a parent of record or the contributor is?
I'm happy to give it a shot, Erin. This is a very complicated thing. I do appreciate the change of terminology to stop calling people parents or spouses, but contributors instead, because that's really what's being asked for. These are people whose information is required on the student's application, and that's all. A couple of things to note that I think are very important. If you are a student applicant and you live with both of your parents and they're your legal parents, whether they're married or not, both of their information will be there. With one little caveat here, if you know, or they've told you that they filed their taxes, in this case, it would be for 2022, as married filing jointly status, generally speaking, only one of them is going to need to complete that section of the FAFSA as the parent, because the IRS transfer will pull both parents' information in because of that tax filing status. I think Elaine, you mentioned earlier something about married filing separately status. If that's how your parents file their taxes, both will need to be contributors. If your parents are divorced or separated, the parent who will be the contributor will be the one who has been providing you the most support, not the one necessarily you live with. Let's be honest, the vast majority of the time, it will be the parent you're living with, but in some cases, it might not be if another parent that you don't live with is providing a lot of financial support to your household. So this can get a little messy in some cases. Elaine also mentioned step parents. So if your legal parent that you live with has remarried, and this is the parent who's providing the most support, that step parent's information will also need to be included as a contributor, or if they were married filing jointly, that will come over together. This is why this is so hard to explain to people. No wonder people get confused. An interesting note, if your parent that provides the most support that you're living with, first from your previous legal parent, is not remarried, but maybe just living with someone, they're partnered together, but not actually married, they are not a contributor in that isolated kind of circumstance. So it is very confusing. I do really encourage looking at studentaid.gov. They have some great information there to help you kind of walk through who exactly my contributors are. And this can be another good thing to think about before you sit down to do the FAFSA.
And
Thank
one thing I
you.
just want to add, because there is a question that I've seen popped up a few times, and I'm just going to address the situation, not necessarily the question, but if you're in a situation where, you know, you're not talking to one of, you don't know one of your parents, you're not in communication with them, or you have been in communication with them, and there's one parent that you have been been supporting you or helping you through, that is not an uncommon scenario. You typically, you know, by answering the questions, you do get to the fact that the person who provided you the most support is the parent that you have contact with. But it's not uncommon for students to only have one parent that they're considering or are able to contact for FAFSA information. I know Zack said it can get messy. There are a lot of considerations and a lot of family situations out there. And on top of that, you know, if you do have situations like an unusual circumstance where it's unsafe for you to contact a parent, you don't have to. The FAFSA will ask you questions if you're required to provide parent information, and it will allow you to identify that. So for people who might be hesitant or have situations at home, just know that there are ways that you can still get through the FAFSA application, and your financial aid office, someone like Zack at your financial aid office, is a fantastic person to talk through if you feel like you're at a crossroads with figuring out how to complete it when you have situations going on.
Thank you
for
guys.
mentioning that, Elaine.
Mhm.
It's important. And I'm sorry, just as a little brief add-in, if you do identify that either maybe you can't contact your parents, if it isn't safe to contact your parents, if you have had to leave the house and are not securely housed or don't have stable housing, they will ask these questions. You can self-identify that these are your situations, and your school will receive a provisional SAI, so to speak, and will be theoretically reaching out to you, or you can contact them directly as well, as they may need some documentation from you.
Great, thanks guys. The next term we are going to look at or discuss is, I don't remember which one it was. There we go. Family size. And this has got some questions in the Q&A on family size. So Elaine, would you like to take this one on and talk about family size and some of the changes?
I'm going to happily defer this one to Zack because we were chatting about this a little bit earlier. And there have been some significant changes to that family size, formerly known as that household size, that are really important to understand.
I will say very briefly for those of you who have done FAFSAs over the years, pretty much everything has been called something else now. So you may see a lot of new terms like across the board. As a general rule for family size, what they're looking at is one, first of all, always you. A sibling, even if maybe they're at college themselves, a sibling can be part of your family, assuming that your parents are supporting them. And actually anyone else that your parents are providing more than half of their financial support. It could be a family member or not a family member. All of those people will count in your family size. This is a little more clearly aligned now with IRS definitions, but it doesn't necessarily, I actually think household size was a better term because they don't have to be a family member. So family size is a little misleading. I will also add, just to be sure everyone's aware, that in the past, how many students were in college for the year or going to be in college for the year did affect the ultimate EFC calculation. It does not affect the SAI calculation. So for those of you who are doing it over multiple years, you could see a shift simply because if you have two in college, that doesn't count anymore. They will still ask you the question, but it unfortunately doesn't.
Awesome. Thank you, Zack. So we've kind of already talked about the untaxed income. Elaine really did a great job earlier in this presentation and kind of explaining that a little bit. So we're going to skip that one and move on to the next term, which is the academic year. And Elaine, I'm going to defer to you.
All right, academic year. Actually, this is not my favorite way to state this term when it comes to the FAFSA. I always default to the award year. In a former life, I did work for the U.S. Department of Education Office of Federal Student Aid, and we were very clear about award year versus academic year. But what I do know is award year makes no sense to people completing the FAFSA. Academic year makes more sense. So when we're completing the FAFSA, you want to look at the academic year for which you're completing it for. This FAFSA opened up in December 2023, but if you notice, it's the 2024-2025 FAFSA. So it's for that academic year, which starts on July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. So that's going to be really helpful when determining which is the correct FAFSA that you want to pick. There is an overlap between years of academic years and FAFSA cycles. Actually, if you go into, and actually I saw this issue arising with some families who were applying early January, saying that they had no problem completing the FAFSA and they got their EFC number and they were all set. Unfortunately, they did not complete the 2024-2025 FAFSA. They completed the 2023-2024 FAFSA, which is okay. It's not going to hurt anything. It's just they need to actually complete the new FAFSA for the new year. So academic year is essentially when you will be attending school, and depending on when your classes start, that's when the FAFSA you would pick. So that academic year is there. Every school's academic year could be a little bit different. So keep that in mind as well. If you're in a traditional program, you're going to see some very similar academic years, which starts and finishes the fall and spring. But if you're doing something more that's a clock hour based program, maybe it's an esthetician program, something like that, you might actually see your academic year be measured more in clock hours and start dates and that sort of thing. So it's a little bit different. But typically, if you're in one of those traditional four-year schools, your academic year is pretty similar to other schools that you're applying to.
Thank you very much, Elaine. So now that you've hit submit and you signed your FAFSA and you've put all your information in, this is what happens next. And there is nobody better to do this than Zack. Put me on the spot.
This of course this year is a little tricky too. So I want to start just by emphasizing, as much as it may be hard to sometimes, it's good to bring as much patience to the table as possible. Because of the soft launch, we mentioned earlier how many of you are seeing that a submitted FAFSA is in this under review status. That is because, again, they have not even finalized everything yet for their FAFSA, and it won't be for another week or two before they even begin sending information to schools that you've applied to. So already, remember, this normally would be opening last October 1st. So we were already starting a few months late, and now schools will not be even getting information until beginning of February or very end of January is the plan. And of course, don't forget, all of these schools' systems, or not all of them, but most of them, will have to be updated. Things will have to be tested to be sure they can properly use the information to determine your eligibility and notify you of it. So sure, they might get your FAFSA information, say February 1st, but it might be a little while after that before they're even able to reach out to you. And I'm sorry, I kind of jumped ahead there, Erin, in our flow. Thank you. The next item after things going to schools, I will respond to accessing your information on a couple of quick levels. First, just like schools aren't getting information just yet, actually applicants aren't getting all the information they'll be entitled to either. So when they begin sending information to schools, they will be sending what's called a FAFSA submission summary back to the applicant that outlines all of the data, possible eligibility, what your SAI is calculated to, or if there's any additional information that's required. So that will be coming in the next couple of weeks, cross your fingers as well. Once all of these contingencies are worked through and your school is able to use that information, they will then be, what they'll do is called packaging, determining what different types of aid you are eligible to receive, which could be institutional and state as well as federal aid, and will send you notification of that so you know what's available to you. That could include grants, scholarships, work study, which we've mentioned, as well as loans. Some schools may require that you accept the loans actively. Some will sort of automatically accept, but I think most are anymore requesting that you accept them if you want them. And you can always see what's happened and what the status of your FAFSA submission is at any time, just simply by logging in with your FSA ID. Thankfully, all of this has been consolidated under studentaid.gov, and they've done a pretty great job, I think, of making that information accessible and easy to find. I lost the question. There was a Q&A in here.
There's been so many questions. We will make sure that all of the questions are addressed following the webinar. If we've missed, there's 33 open questions. So thank you guys so much for all of your interactivity tonight. We will have a blog post available to answer all of these questions following the webinar. So the Ascent team will work with Zack and Elaine to make sure that we address everything. We're at time, so I want to just be mindful of all of that.
Already. I'm so sorry.
I know it went by so fast. It was so fun. But Zack, I'll let you finish your thought, and then we'll have to wrap up here.
Sure. It was only, and now of course, thank you, because now I've been able to remember what the question was. Great. And it was about making a correction, just that when you receive the FAFSA submission summary, please do look it over. Because there's still always some information you are manually inputting, and you want to be sure that that is accurate. And if it's not, you need only log back in, follow the instructions to make a correction, and you can do that, and your school will then receive the updated information shortly after.
Just to add to Zack really quick, with all of the soft launch and the schools having a little bit more time with processing and getting offer letters out, be patient. If you submit your FAFSA and you don't quite see anything right away, don't worry. It's going to be there. It's just going to take a little bit more time than normal. So just be patient. And if you have any questions, always reach out to your financial aid office at the college that you're going to.
And I think one great improvement this year is when you, as the student, you're the owner of that FAFSA. So even if you have contributors putting information in there, you can actually check the status and track if your contributor completed their section or not. So if you're worried about it getting stuck because it hasn't been submitted, you can log back in and check your FAFSA status and politely nudge any contributors who maybe haven't pushed it along quite yet, to make sure that it's all submitted and all set, ready to go. When it can be processed, it will be processed. And like everyone said, patience will be a virtue this go around. And it always is. You know, there's a lot of students out there. There's only so many financial aid advisors. They do a fantastic job. But they will help you and get you through the process. And if there's issues, they will help you through it as well. As somebody who had FAFSA issues even way back in the day when I had to complete the FAFSA and go to school, I always felt a lot of anxiety. But once I finally got some time with a financial aid advisor, which they were always fantastic, they could help me through it, and we got through it. And they send you correspondence. So read your emails. Make sure you're in your portals, getting your notifications. If anything's required, make sure you address it as soon as possible, because, you know, you want to make sure you get your aid and everything runs as smoothly as possible.
Elaine, thank you so much. And I really hope that this webinar has helped everyone to feel less of that anxiety around filling out their FAFSA. As Erin mentioned, billions of dollars are left unacclaimed every year. So fill it out and see what you're eligible for. If you are looking for other options too, there are scholarships out there. As you may know, for anyone that registered for this webinar, Ascent is giving away a $500 scholarship, and we give away $1,000 of scholarships every single month to anyone out there. So scan this QR code on the left here to view any of our scholarships. Ascent is also one of the most innovative private student lenders out there. And so if you're looking for alternative solutions, then of course we would love to possibly work with you. But thank you all so much for attending. This was a really dynamic and interesting conversation. Zack, Elaine, Erin, thank you for your time on a Wednesday night. And to all the attendees, again, there's so many questions coming through. I'm sorry we didn't have time to address all of them, and we will do our best. So look out in your email for who that scholarship winner is, the recording, and a link to our blog post with answers to all of these questions. And thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening.